או שאני מדבר על עצמי, שיצא לקראתך או שישאר במקומי. אם אפשר בבקשה דבר שפה ברורה, כי אני לא מצליח להבין מה בעצם קרה. קולך בא והולך, כל הזמן משתנה לי. האם אתה עדיין איתי?
Okay, everybody, Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to those in Zoom. On Zoom, Shabbat Shalom, Joe, Marla.
Talking rubble, right?
We're talking about Rabbalah. Okay, everybody, let's come together. It's time for Torah. We don't want bitul Torah. We don't want to waste Torah time. And just remember in the room that they could hear it. It was funny one. Okay. So again, Shabbat Shalom. So good to be here. So good to see many of you from all over the world, all over the United States for sure. A little Canada over there. And today we're doing the last parsha of Exodus, of Shemot, Pikude. And he's like, yes, chazak, chazak, v'nit chazek. We're getting to the end of the book. Amazing. And we're going to do a little snippet of Vayikra because the way the rabbis or commentators have made sense of the connection between the end of Shemot and the beginning of Vayikra is fascinating. So it's called Humility and Relationship Lessons from the End of Exodus. But we're actually going to ask two questions. One question is, what is this Kvod Adonai that fills the Mishkan so that Moshe can't answer? And then we're going to go to the connection between the end of Exodus and the beginning of Vayikra, connected to the way the glory of God fills the Mishkan. Okay, so with that, people are still coming in, so welcome, welcome. And let's have the blessing over Torah session. Thank you so much, Caroline. Everybody in cacophony, Baruch Atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, God, creator of all of us and the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to soak in your divine wisdom. Okay, so we're going to jump right in. If you could share, Caroline, that would be great. So again,
can you send me the source sheet link, please?
Oh, I thought it was sent to you.
No, I haven't gotten it yet, but that is A-okay. Yeah.
Okay.
It's not posted yet.
Send it to everybody. Second. Here we go. So while Caroline pulls that up, I will say that between the end of one book and the beginning of the next in the Torah scroll, right? A number of lines are skipped. I think it's 4 lines. And you'll see the image in a second. Caroline, do you have that?
Yes, I do. I'm just creating a PDF of it. 1 second.
Special. Thank you so much. Okay, so there's the image. And what I also want you to take a look at is that small aleph at the beginning of Vayikra. So you see the end of one book, the Chol Mas'ehem, for those of you who can read the Hebrew, and the beginning of the next, Vayikra, and the Vayikra has a small aleph in it, and we will discuss that as we go on. So that's the end of one book and the beginning of the next. Okay, so let's read the end of Exodus. If you can pull up source 2, Caroline, thank you so much. Perfect. Vayakam, so this is the end of the building of the Mishkan. Vayakam et hechatzer saviv la-mishkan, and he set up the enclosure around the tabernacle and the altar. And this is Moshe, v'lamizbeach, vayiten et masach sha'ar hechatzer, and the altar, and put up the screen for the gate of the enclosure. Vayichal Moshe et hamilacha, and Moshe finished the work. So that language, right, milacha, the work, and also vayichal, brings us right back to Genesis, right? Finishing and that specific word for work brings us back to Genesis 1 and God, at the end of Genesis 1, God finishing the work, right? Which is the reason the rabbis connect all the work that was done in the Mishkan and Shabbat, right? So finishing the Mishkan and the Israelites finishing that work is as if they finished creating the world. And all the work that was sort of led to the Mishkan is what's forbidden on Shabbat. So though that link is made very strongly, both literarily and then halachically, and then legally. And the cloud covered the tent of meeting. So you remember God's cloud and fire accompanied the Israelites through the wilderness. Vod Adonai maleh et HaMishkan, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. So we're going to trace that root, both, right? The root for the glory or the presence of Adonai, Chaf Bet or Vet Dalet, right? We're going to follow that root and know that literally, right, it means heaviness, like weight, right? Like kabed et avicha v'et imecha, right? Honor your father and mother. It's like to give them weight, right? It's like the weightiness that they have and the weightiness that the divine presence has. So here's what's interesting in 35. V'lo yachol Moshe lavo el Ohel Moed, yishachan alav ha'enan, and Moses cannot enter the tent of meeting. Why? Because the cloud had settled upon it. And Kvod Adonai maleh et HaMishkan, and the presence of Adonai filled the tabernacle. So there's something about Kvod, the weightiness, the presence, the glory of God, that's so palpable that Moshe cannot enter the Mishkan. That's fascinating, right? What is going on here? What an interesting idea. And I often say that the ancient Israelites had the opposite problem than we, right? For them, the presence of God is overwhelming. Like they hear God's voice at Sinai, they're like absolutely terrified and they think they're gonna die. And we are always looking for the presence of God. Like, where's God? Where's God? Where's God? And they're like, keep away. And here, right, the presence is so palpable again that Moshe cannot enter, not enter the Mishkan. I remember once my husband and I were in India, in the Himalayas, like above Dharamsala, where the Dalai Lama lives. And it was so beautiful. We so felt that glory, like that kabod, that my husband went around, singing, the tune for Kvod Adonai maleh et haolam, right? The presence of God filled the universe. And it was like a place where we just really felt it. So it's interesting to know, like, where do you feel that sort of glory or majesty? Uve'alot ha'anan me'al ha'mishkan yis'u b'nei Yisrael v'chol mas'ehem. And when the cloud lifted from the tabernacle, the Israelites would set out on their various journeys. So that was the sign for them to move. V'im lo ya'alehanan, v'lo yis'u et yom he'alad loto. But if the cloud did not lift, they would not set out until such time as it did lift. Okay, so for some reason I have one verse cut out here. So I'm going to read it from the Torah scroll above. Ki anan Adonai al hamishkan. You can go up, Caroline. No, source one. Source one. Yeah, that's right. Ki anan Adonai al hamishkan yomam. The HTL Laila Bo. Le'enei kol beYisrael b'chol mas Hashem. So because the cloud of Adonai was on the Mishkan in the day and fire on it at night, or in it at night, in the eyes of the whole house of Israel in all their journeys. So I love that the book of Exodus ends with the subjective vision, subjective vision of the Israelites, finally like beholding the regularity of the signs of God, right? The cloud and the fire. You know, and we talked about this a little bit in Beit Midrash on Tuesday night for whoever was there. For the Israelites, if you trace their collective vision, when Moshe goes up to hear the instructions of the tabernacle and to receive the first tablets, and he disappears into a cloud, what the people see is an Eish Ochelet, right? A consuming fire on the top of the mountain, right? And that's how God manifested to them. And they were really scared of that consuming fire and being consumed. Now, if you remember, Moshe at the burning bush, right, in chapter 3, I think it is, beholds God as a fire that doesn't consume. So Moshe is able to take in the presence of God as a non-consuming presence, but the people can't. Right? It's right. The text, the language around it is actually exactly the opposite. And I think it makes sense because Moshe was never a slave. And for the Israelites, like intensity, power is absolutely scary for them. Okay, so let's go on. So Moshe cannot enter. And now I want to follow a little bit this word kavod, and we're going to skip 3 and go to 4. So this is before the Israelites leave Egypt, and they're getting like the instructions for Passover, and God says, Moshe, let the Egyptians know that I'm Adonai. When I gain glory through Pharaoh, his chariots and his riders. Right, so somehow God's glory or weight is going to be manifested in what happens to Pharaoh, his chariots, and his riders. And let's see what happens. So in source 5, chapter 14. V'yirdefu Mitzrayim v'yavo acharehem kol sus paro v'fo u'parashav el toch hayam. Then the Egyptians came in pursuit after them into the sea, all of Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and riders. Vayihi ba'ashmoret haboker vayishkef Adonai el machaneh Mitzrayim ba'amud eish va'anan. Vayaham et machaneh Mitzrayim. At the morning watch, Adonai looked down upon the Egyptian army from a pillar of fire and cloud and threw the Egyptian army into a panic. Okay, so now here's where the root kaved, kaf vet dalet, appears again. Vayasar et ofan markevotav vayinhagehu bich beidut. And the wheels of the chariot, their chariot, locked the wheels of their chariot so that they move forward with difficulty, but with beidut, right? They became so heavy they couldn't go forward, like they were stuck. Ki Adonai, I'm sorry, Vayomer Mitzrayim, Anusa Mipnei Yisrael, Ki Adonai Nilcham Lahem B'Mitzrayim. And the Egyptians said, let us flee from the Israelites, for Adonai is fighting for them against Egypt. So it seems like the way the root works is that if you behold the awe of God, then it's like weightiness before you. But if you resist it, you become heavy yourself. Right? Like the Egyptians couldn't go forward because of that faith, because of that heaviness. Okay. Let me just stop for a minute and see if there are any comments. I see that.
Shabbat Shalom. I have a question because I don't
Yeah.
recall perfectly when Moshe was in Pharaoh's court. How did the Egyptians know Hashem's name? Where did they pick that up? Was that during the
Maybe what Moshe said to Pharaoh. I don't know, but that's my guess. Good question. Okay, Jay.
Shabbat Shalom. I don't know if this anticipates where you want to go too much, but I love this intertextuality. And I was thinking about the law, which Vayikra is all about. I mean, in terms of what it's known for, and the cloud and the transition. And that happens at the end of the first parsha we really have law. It happens at the end of Mishpatim. At the end of Mishpatim, Moshe is in the cloud. And then we immediately transition rather abruptly, almost like from Exodus to Vayikra, to the building of the Mishkan, to Truma. Suddenly, and so I'm just trying to figure out this bookending or this kind of issue of being in a cloud and then important, quote, legal and extra legal instructions. It's almost as if there's some kind of connection between being in that heavy cloud and maybe confusion, whatever, and then being shown what needs to happen. I don't know.
Well, if we think about the cloud as the manifestation of the presence of God, the whole book of Leviticus is about negotiating that presence, right? Through offerings and the holiness code. So it's like how do the Israelites live in the presence of God without being zapped, basically?
Right, but that's, if you think about a cloud and the heaviness of a cloud from the perspective of the people who experience it, yeah, that's sort of the interesting transition for me from Truma to Mishpatim, from Mishpatim to Truma, and from Shmot to Vayikra.
We're going to get some more information about the cloud and the fire, so hold that and see if that helps clarify things. Okay. Let's look at Exodus 16. Asher, do you feel like reading? Number 6. So here, this is before Sinai, and it's another sort of example of the manifestation of the presence of God.
Vayomer Moshe ve'Aharon. Moshe and Aharon spoke El Kol B'nai Yisrael, to all of the children of Israel. Erev, in the evening, Vida'atem, and you will know, beware, acknowledge, Ki Adonai hotzi etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim, that Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh brought you out of the land of Mitzrayim. Uvoker, and in the morning, Ureitem et kavod Adonai, you will see the kavod of Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, Bisham'o et tlunotechem al Adonai, while he has heard your complaints against Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh. V'nachnu ma, what are we? Ki talinu aleinu, that you'd be complaining against us.
So this is in the wake of their complaints about manna and something to eat.
Vayomer Moshe, Moshe said, Betet Adonai lachem ba'erev basar le'echol. When Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh gives you in the evening flesh to eat, v'lechem baboker lisboa, and food in the morning until you are satisfied, bishmoa Adonai et tlunotechem asher atem melinim alav, while Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh has heard your complaints that you are complaining against him, v'nachnu ma lo aleinu tlunotechem ki al Adonai. What are we? It's not against us that your complaints are based, rather against Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. Vayomer Moshe el Aharon, Moshe said to Aaron, Emor el kol adat b'nei Yisrael, you speak to the assembly of the children of Israel, Kirevu lifnei Adonai, draw close to the presence of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh, ki shama et tlunotechem, because he has heard your complaints. Vayhi kedaber Aharon el kol adat b'nei Yisrael, and it occurred while Aharon was speaking to the entire assembly of the children of Israel, vayifnu el hamidbar, they faced towards the wilderness, v'hinei kvod Adonai nir'a be'anan, and look, the kavod of Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh was visible in the cloud.
So this is an example of God appearing spontaneously, or quote Adonai appearing spontaneously in a cloud, as opposed to the regularity of the cloud of fire that travels with them.
But that seemed to be in reaction to their rumblings.
Totally.
Right.
Totally.
So it's
It's what?
triggered.
It's totally triggered by an event, right? They're complaining, and it's like, you're forgetting who's sustaining you in the wilderness. And it's like, it's a palpable reminder of what the Israelites should be aware of, but forget again and again.
Yeah, so we know it appears regularly, but also triggered by certain.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I agree. Okay, Exodus 19. Here we are standing at Sinai. And again, let's notice how God's presence manifests. There's a famous passage as they're sort of, the Israelites are getting ready for Sinai, and there's the famous line, said to the men, that Moshe says to the men, that 3 days, do not approach a woman so that you'll be ready for Sinai. And then we launch into this passage. Ashachayim?
Vayhi bayom hashlishi, and it happened on day 3, bihiyot boker, as morning was happening, vayhi kolot uvrakim, there was thunder and lightning, v'anan kaved al hahar, and heavy cloud on the mountain, kol shofar hazak, and strong sound of the shofar, achazak me'od, very strong sound of the shofar, v'yeherad kol ha'am asher b'mahaneh, the entire nation in the camp trembled. Vayosei Moshe et.
So note that the cloud is heavy on the mountain. So it's not kvod Adonai. Here it's not the presence of God, but it's the heaviness of the cloud. So there's all kinds of iterations of cloud and heaviness around God's presence.
Vayosei Moshe et ha'am lekrata Elohim min ha'mahaneh. Moshe brought out the nation towards Elohim from the camp. Vayit yasevu betahtit hahar, and they stood themselves up at the bottom of the mountain. V'har Sinai ashan kullo mipnei asher yarad alav Adonai ba'esh. Mount Sinai was full of smoke because Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh had descended upon it in fire. Vaya'al ashano ke'eshen hakivshan, its smoke went up like the smoke of a furnace. Vayeherad kol hahar me'od, and the mountain trembled violently.
Okay, let's stop there for a second. So cloud and fire are the two ways that God manifests God's self, right? Throughout the Torah. But note also where it says the whole mountain is trembling. There's some manuscripts, right? I found this really interesting that all the people trembled violently as opposed to the whole mountain. And we'll see later that the people do tremble.
We saw it
Right,
before
so-
too. The earlier verse, I think.
Vayicharad kol ha- Absolutely. So in 16, the whole nation is trembling, and here the mountain seems to mirror them. Although in some manuscripts, is all the people are trembling there. So whatever it is, it's an overwhelmingly terrifying experience. Okay, go on.
ויהי קול השופר הולך וחזק מאוד. It happened. The sound of the shofar was progressively more and more strong. Moshe yedaber, Moshe would speak, v'ha'elohim ya'anenu v'kol, and Elohim would respond in sound. Vayered Adonai al har Sinai el rosh hahar, Yud-He Vav-He came down onto Mount Sinai to the top of the mountain. Vayikra Adonai le-Moshe el rosh hahar vayal Moshe. Yud-He Vav-He summoned Moshe to the top of the mountain, and Moshe ascended.
So note that the people can't go close to the mountain because they'll be zapped. But Moshe can go up. Right? For Moshe, somehow it's less dangerous. And it seems like Moshe has like a different consciousness that allows him to get close to God, as opposed to the regular old Israelite, right? The just freed slave.
Vayomer, I just lost my. Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Raid ha'ed ba'am. Yud-He Vav-He said to Moshe, go down and give testimony among the people. Pen yehersu el Adonai lirot, lest they break through or destroy something towards Yud-He Vav-He to see, v'nafal mimenu rav, and many of them would fall.
So this underlines the danger around Mount Sinai. And I remember my Bible teacher at JTS, Yochanan Nutz, who famous Bible scholar throughout the world, would say, like, think about it as like electricity that's going to zap you. It's not like God's like deciding to zap them. It's not like this anger of God. It's this intense sort of, electrifying, powerful energy. And if you, like, the wrong element touches it, then
Energy field.
energy field. Yeah. It sort of makes God a little bit more palatable to think about God, not so much as anger as like just, it's just like a bad chemical reaction.
I like the image of radiation because it does have some of the elements of fire.
Yes. Yeah. Right?
I don't like it.
You don't like that? Okay.
No, I mean, it's a good idea, but
Doesn't work for you.
it's too scary.
Yeah, it is very scary. This whole scene is actually terrifying. And I think it's important that we take in the terror of our ancestors. Like, it's very plain here. And it's plain throughout the Torah how scared they are. Right? To be in the wilderness, to be before God, to be at Sinai, all. Let's stop sharing for a minute as people discuss. Well, maybe come closer to the table so that people can hear from there.
Okay, that found.
Well, even if it's not profound, if you're gonna be taking up space, people want to hear
Okay,
it.
very good. So thank you, everyone. Join you on that.
Rob will be the judge of how profound Paul is.
So
People
I
On
am,
Zoom missed that.
I'm trying to, so all of these images of God,
Yes.
all these manifestations of
Yeah.
God, one would presume are incredibly intentional. And so
I read this literature as it is intentional.
God
and lit-
is
and as
manifesting
it is
itself in a
literature.
particular way. And the divine wishes to have a very specific effect on the people.
Okay.
And the divine, it seems to me that over the course of this journey, the divine is struggling to have an effect on the people that is, if not permanent, long lasting.
Correct.
And the
Like a
divine
chromatic imprint.
has not been terribly successful in that. I mean, in Genesis,
it's a
it
struggle.
was a physical manifestation, and we saw the divine in person. And in Exodus, we see manifestations of God. We see fire. We see smoke. Moses gets to see God, and maybe some of the people do, or some of the 70 do, but the people really don't. But through it all, the
But
people
Moses
are
gets to see
resisting.
God in a limited way, and so do the elders,
Right.
right?
But
Remember, it says like no person can see God's face and live.
yes,
So Moshe sees God's back.
yes.
Okay.
So I guess it's really my confusion here is that
You're in a cloud.
I am in permanently, yeah, sadly. It's just a lack of success that the divine is having in making its presence known in a way that is satisfactory, both to the divine and to the people.
I think that's a beautiful question. Like it's God struggling throughout the Torah to make God self-known. And at the end of Exodus, there is some success, right? In the people's eye, right? There's two signs of God, the cloud and the fire, that the people have internalized. That's why we have their subjective vision at the end of Exodus. But that's not like a permanent connection. The connection comes and goes, right? It's not a reliable connection, which is why I started with this song by Ehud Banai, who's a Baal Tshuva, a person who's become religious over their lives, a musician, very famous musician in Israel, who writes the song called Answer Me and says like, the connection isn't good. Like, I can't hear you. How is this working? And also in the Torah, it's just not a regular connection. It just isn't. It's an unstable one. And I think that reflects who we are and who God is.
Yes.
Yes.
But whether, I guess then the question becomes, is that insecure connection intentional?
Is that insecure connection? Well, to me, the way I read the Torah is that the Torah reflects what life is and what truth is. So I think it's an insecure connection. I think it is an insecure connection. And we're here to figure out how to deepen the connection, how to hear the frequencies and spiritual attunement. So I don't exactly have an answer to your question, but I think someone's not muted. Caroline, can you help us with that?
Yes, I can.
What's the verdict?
Okay,
Okay, so we're gonna see more about that. And then there's a couple of questions online. Okay, go ahead.
I think that it's not so much God's failure, it's humans' failure to perceive that. And what it's showing us is that,
It may not be God's failure, but it's God's struggle.
yeah, struggle, it's our struggle too.
Absolutely, it's a
And-
mutual
and-
struggle.
I think the issue is there, how do you get these people who were completely alien to this notion of divinity to interject that? And that brings me to the idea of Kedusha, of understanding
holiness.
Kedusha, and then Shabbat. I think Shabbat is the mechanism nowadays to renew this connection, or to, when you're saying we're out of sync in the frequency, it's an opportunity for us to tune back in.
Absolutely. Shabbat's an opportunity, bracha, blessing is an opportunity.
Right.
I mean, all
No,
kinds of mitzvot are opportunities. I'm gonna go to Asher Chaim, and I want to go back to the text, and then we'll call on other people, okay? Especially if you haven't spoken yet.
I definitely believe in the scary God part. And sometimes I think we want a God who is so tame that we have God in our back pocket. And I think the biblical portrayal of God, I like the notion of radiation because it explains Moshe coming down from the mountain, and Haran or Panav, the skin of his face had turned into something like a horn, like
Yeah.
radiation burns. And that would explain why the people are so shocked and why he has to wear a veil. And the whole idea of God wanting to be close to us and wanting us to have proper insulation so that we don't get too close and get burned. I think that's what Vayikra is all about. How can we have intimacy through Kohanim doing specific actions at specific times, Leviim keeping us far enough away so we don't get killed in the process? It's that same challenge that God wants to be intimate with us, knowing that God can't allow us to get too close.
Yeah, absolutely. The Mishkan is all about navigating that dangerous presence safely for the most part, because look at what happens to Aaron's sons. Let's go on with the text, because there are a few things I want to get to, and then Beth, I'll call on you in a few other people. So, Asha Caroline, can you screen share, please? You were in the middle of number 7.
We were at verse 21, where Moshe has his ups and downs.
Yeah.
Verse 20, God tells him to go back down. I'm sorry, 21, God told him to go back down. 22, V'gam hakohanim hanigashim el Adonai yitkadashu pen yifrotz bahem Adonai. And also the Kohanim, the officiants who are being brought close to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh shall be sanctified, lest Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh break out among them. Vayomer Moshe el Adonai, lo yuchal ha'am la'alot el har Sinai. Moshe said to Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, the people cannot go up to Mount Sinai, ki ata ha'edot abanu lemor hagbel et har v'kiddashto, because you yourself testified among us, saying, set boundaries around the mountain and make it holy. Vayomer elav Adonai, lech red, ve'alita ata ve'Aharon imach. Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh said, go down, and then come up, you and Aharon with you. V'hakohanim ve'ha'am, al yehersu la'alot el Adonai, pen yifrotz bam. But the officiants and the people shall not break through to go up towards Yud-Heh-Vav-Heh, lest God burst out, explode among them. Vayered Moshe el ha'am, vayomer alehem. Moshe came down to the people and said to them,
whatever. I meant to cut it off at 24. But so, yeah. So notice that, there's so much repetition about going down and going up, and you can see that the experience is overwhelming from the repetition of language, right? And it's like, you could just sense the danger, like, oh no, okay, come up. Oh no, go down. Okay, come up, go down. And it's like, go down, in case somehow there'll be destruction, right? Okay, so now let's go to number 8.
Say something
What?
quick. I think it's very important to look at all of this through feeling and through abstraction of the words, and not to look for anything really very literal, because the more literal you look, the more intense you get in your own thinking, and to keep an open mind and heart and feeling and openness is what's expected of us now.
Beautiful, Monica.
Thank
you. I also think we should keep alive even the literal level. I think if we have the flexibility to go between different perspectives,
that all of these metaphors, that a lot of this is metaphor, because nobody knows exactly.
It's testimony.
Nobody knows.
It's testimony about a spiritual experience, and we do our best to interpret it. Let's go to 8, and then I'm going to read 9 and 10, and we'll open up the conversation.
Vaya'al Moshe el hahar, vaychas ha'anan et hahar.
This is the end of Mishpatim. So the people are at Sinai, and then they hear all this civil law, or Moshe shares all this civil law. And then Moshe goes back up the mountain and to hear the instructions for the Mishkan and to receive the first tablets. And this is the scene where Moshe goes back up the mountain. Sorry, Ashrafan, go on.
Moshe went up to the mountain, and the cloud covered the mountain. Vayishkon kivod Adonai al har Sinai, vaychasehu ha'anan sheshet yamim. The kavod of Yud He Vav He rested upon Mount Sinai, and the cloud covered it for 6 days. Vayikra el Moshe bayom hashvi'i mitoch ha'anan. And he called to Moshe on the 7th day from the midst of the cloud. Umar'e kvod Adonai ke'esh ochelet berosh hahar. The appearance of the kavod of Yud He Vav He was like a devouring fire at the top of the mountain, l'einei b'nei Yisrael, in the eyes of the children of Israel. Vayavo Moshe betoch ha'anan, vaya'al el hahar. Moshe entered the midst of the cloud and went up the mountain. Vayhi Moshe bahar 40 yom v'arba'im laila. Moshe was in the mountain 40 days and 40 nights.
Okay, so note that again, that the image of the glory of God or the weightiness of God or the presence of God appeared like consuming fire at the top of the mountain in the eyes of all Israel. So the Torah takes pains to tell us to let us know what is the Israelites' experience here, and which is really interesting because at the same time as Moshe is getting all the details for the Mishkan, what are the people below doing? They're worshiping a golden calf. They're flipping out because Moshe has disappeared into the consuming fire, and they don't know when he's coming back. Because he told the elders, like, I'll be back, but he never told the people. It's not a great moment of leadership.
This is the 40 days.
This is the 40 days. Correct. This is the first 40 days. Okay, so now let's look at some interesting scholarship on the kavod. So number 9. This is from a wonderful website called Torah.com, where all kinds of scholars write about the Torah. The cloud is what protects human beings from potentially fatal exposure. This goes to Tasha Khan's radiation image. The intense energy of Adonai's presence. And then let's look at Robert Alter, and this is really helpful for me. The cloud and the glory appear to be virtual synonyms, or at the very least, overlapping terms. The Lord's glory, kavod, is clearly a palpably concrete manifestation of the deity. So this is actually the literal level that Pacha was talking about, right? So it's trying to understand what was going on in the Torah at the time that the Torah was sort of written or developed. For all the metaphysical attributes later theology would attach to it, it may have been imagined as a kind of mantle of light enveloping God, with the cloud giving off a luminosity by day, parallel to the fire by night. So the other thing I read about it is like it's always a fire and a cloud, but you only see the fire in the midst of the cloud at night. You don't see it by day. Okay, so those two images are kind of one. And the cloud protecting us from the fire, God. Right? And it's all about navigating the presence of God with, the Israelites and how that works. Okay, so I want to now bring up the contradiction, and the contradiction is raised by the Talmud. Like, what is going on here in terms of when Moshe is able to enter into the cloud and when not? So Rabbi Zrika Ramen. So Rabbi Zrika raised up a contradiction. Between verses before Rabbi Elazar, Amri la Amar Rabbi Zrika. And some say that Rabbi Zrika said that Rabbi Elazar raised a contradiction. Okay. Lo yachol Moshe lavo el ohem moed ki shachan alav ha'enan. So this is a quote from the end of Exodus, as we saw it. And Moshe could not enter the tent of meeting because God's cloud was resting. Ukativ, but it says somewhere else, right? In Exodus 24, as we saw, the Yavo Moshe b'toch ha'anan. But we saw somewhere else that Moshe entered the cloud. Milamed shetifaso hakadosh baruch hu Moshe behaviu be'anan. This teaches us that the Holy One, blessed be He, grabbed Moses and brought him into the cloud, and that's how they resolve these two sort of seemingly contradictory scenes. Okay, let me stop and take a couple of comments, and then we're going to go into the transition between Exodus and Vayikra. Okay.
Wendy's had her hand up.
Oh, Wendy, sorry, Wendy.
Um, you know, you talk about the conflict between Hashem and the people, but that was a conflict that was instituted by Hashem when He gave the people free will, and so He set up that conflict. And
Wait, how would you? I didn't use the word conflict. I'm interested in your use of that word. What do you think the conflict is? What's the conflict?
Because I think Hashem wants the people to choose God by their own free will and their own choice, not have it mandated.
Got it. I see. That's you're responding to Paul's.
Not
yeah.
have it mandated.
Got it.
And so, you know, they say the Jewish people are Yisrael, that they struggle, but so is Hashem. Hashem is Yisrael because He struggles with the people. And so, and you know, mystically, they say, you know, God, you can't be a king without a kingdom, and God needs a kingdom, but He doesn't want it mandated. He wants that kingdom to be
beautiful
of their own
and
own
people
free
and
will.
the people are conflicted because it's scary to get close to God.
Right.
Okay. Thank you. That's beautiful. Okay, Rob, who hasn't spoken, yeah.
I overheard you use the word the Ramchal for the class.
Yeah.
So I was thinking about the Ramchal.
Yeah, Sato.
Yes.
Yeah.
And he talks about everything is one. That the Jewish people, the world, the universe, God are one. So in this story, it's two, but it can't be two. It's one. And I think that's the struggle that Paul spoke about and the Yetzer Hara comes into play, because that's the one thing that's outside of the Ramchal's thinking, is the Yetzer Hara operates outside of God, which is impossible. Without getting too crazy, but that is the struggle that God can't separate. We can't separate from God. So the concept is we have to look internally to ourselves on how to make the world a better place. But God is there, He's within us, but we can never, there's no God. You get it. I think it's.
So you're talking about you're thinking about the duality in the Torah as God is sort of presented and manifested, and that struggle to come into contact with this divine presence. And you're also saying, like, there's another perspective, which is God is not sort of outside of ourselves. God is like everything's kind of unified. There's no God to confront.
Yes.
And perhaps they're both true on some level. Okay, Beth and then Jay.
I've been thinking about God's struggle and the fear of the people and the various ups and downs off the mountain that Moshe makes. And it brought to mind binary star systems in which there are two stars which are rotating around a common center of gravity, and they are a system. They don't get away from each other, but neither do they collide. And the other thing that I always think about, I always come back to evolution on our planet and the evolution of us.
Beautiful image, Beth. I love it.
Yeah. And in every environment, the environment and the species within it are constantly co-evolving and affecting each other. And it's like the plants in the niche but the niche is also affected by the plant, and same too with animal life. And I think there's a way in which you could say that God and Israel are like the binary star system, where we're, on one level, we're separate entities, but on another level, we're part of a singular system.
Yeah. Thank you, Shamati. And this actually is in conversation with what Rob just said. Okay, Jay, I was wondering how all this conversation has responded to your earlier question. And
Well,
if it's
I'm actually fascinated by the same thing Beth just articulated, although I don't know if my solutions are quite as compelling. This sort of mutual struggle, people struggle and God struggle. Two images come to mind. One is the old psychologist approach avoidance kind of dynamic, but I also was thinking of all of us, everybody, God included, almost being pharmacists. And what is the main methodology of old time pharmacists? It's titration. And it's like up and down, up. Well, let's try that up. No, too far up. Let's go down, too far down. Or let's approach. Or wait a second, God's going to explode among us. So how do you find, how do you titrate that relationship? And it seems to me, and I take comfort in this, in that it is unsolvable. Because if we were to solve that, I'm not sure I'd like that situation.
absolutely, it's unsolvable. And think about the different levels. Like Moshe can go to the top of the mountain. The elders and Aaron can go to the like the mid mountain, and the people have to like stand back at the bottom of the mountain. Right? There's titration also for each different group, depending on like their consciousness and who they are. I think in the sort of in the nation.
Right, and there's this ultimate kiru, which is, the end goal of many of us, so to speak. And yet there's the Yifrotzbam, God can explode among us. So there's that danger also.
No, I'm gonna go on. I'm sorry. I'm gonna go on. I'm sorry. Vayikra. Okay, Asher Chaim, you're back on, and Caroline, please screen share. So I want to look at and see what happens at the beginning of Vayikra. We're now in source 12.
ויקרא אל משה, וידבר אדוני אליו מאוהל מועד, לאמור. We're back down on the ground. They've built the Mishkan, which was so full that of God's presence that there was no room for Moshe. And now verse 1, he called out to Moshe. Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh spoke to him from the tent of meeting, saying.
So wait, so Vayikra, remember, is written with a small aleph, right? And while that is probably a scribal issue, if you can go down a little bit, Caroline, back to Vayikra. No. I'm sorry, up, I meant up. That's right, right there. First, source 12. So that aleph at the end of Vayikra was written with a small aleph, which is probably, again, a scribal issue. But the rabbis have made so much meaning out of this. Like, why is there that small aleph there? And it seems to point to the notion of humility, which we will, or like simsum, contraction, which we'll get into in a minute. Okay, so now the next piece from Tanhuma, which I want to read parts of. Hold on, let me just find the right place. Okay, Tanhuma. So Tanhuma really names how Moshe is different than everybody else. So they start with this piece from Pirkei Avot, the Ethics of the Father, saying, "V'shanu rabotenu," right? Our rabbis taught. Ezehu gibor, who is strong, who's mighty? Hakodesh et yitro, the one who masters their own impulses, right? Their own yetzer hara, their own evil impulses, or all impulses in general. And then Rabbi Tanhum Bar Hanilai Omer. So Rabbi Tanhum says, "Mi giborei koach," and who is like a sort of a a warrior of strength. Ze Moshe. It's Moshe. She'en gibor kamoto. Because there is no warrior or no one as mighty as Moshe is. And what examples do they give? Israel omdim l'pnei Har Sinai. That Israel stands at Har Sinai. V'lo yachlu l'shmo et kol hadibor. And they couldn't hear the voice of God, right? The voice of the divine speech. Okay. And then they give a proof text from Deuteronomy. If we continue hearing the voice of the Lord our God any longer, we shall die, right? So this is what they say in Exodus, and then it's repeated again in Deuteronomy. We can't hear God's voice. We're not strong enough. Moshe lo nizuk, and Moshe was not damaged by the divine voice. So we talked again about Moshe at the burning bush, right? Being able to tolerate the intensity of God and the people not able to tolerate that intensity. Okay, we're going to skip a little bit and go to, let's see. Second. There's a lot of proof text and just, okay, here we go. Let's see, this is Moshe, to whom the Holy One, blessed be he, said, make a tabernacle. So it's saying that Moshe is basically stronger than everybody. At the end of this, Vaya Ahmed Mibachutz. Okay, so God told Moshe to create a tabernacle, and Moshe hurried and did this. Va'amad b'nizdarez va'asam mishkan. Vaya Omed Mibachutz. And Moshe was standing outside. Shehaya mitjarel lavo el ohel moed. Because he was afraid to enter Ohel Moed at the end of Exodus, right? This is sort of explained the end of Exodus. And then God says, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu, we're about 6 lines from the bottom of the Midrash. Eino din shemoshe asad hamishkan yehe omed mibachutz v'ani mibifnim. Is it possible that Moshe, who made the Mishkan, is standing outside and I am inside? Ella harini koreh oto sheyikanes. So behold, I'm going to call him in, right? Ketiv v'yikra el Moshe. So that's why we have this transition from the end of Exodus, where Moshe is outside, and the beginning of Leviticus, where Moshe is called in. Okay, so it's almost like the book of Exodus ends at a painful place for Moshe and a good place for the Israelites. Right? Moshe was above in a cloud and close to God, but somehow when Moshe's on the same plane, right, on the earth with human beings, he can't enter. Right? Somehow the manifestation of the glory of God sort of is different on earth for Moshe than it was up on the mountain. But according to the Midrash, God sees this, right, and sees Moshe locked out and calls Moshe. And that explains the transition between the end of Exodus and the beginning of Vayikra. Okay, so now let's go to 2 more things, and then I will call on a couple of people. I have to end a little bit early because I have to go leave services. So look at number 14. The Rabbi Chama Bar Chanina, can it be that Moshe feared the cloud? Is it not already written, Moses entered into the midst of the cloud? In what sense was he not able? So again, the rabbis are wondering about the end of Exodus. Why did he enter? But because Moses accorded honor to the Shekhinah and did not enter until he was summoned inside. So again, that explains the beginning of Vayikra, that Moshe is called in.
Or grab, like you said, like the other one.
Yes. Yeah. Well, grabbed when he was at the top of the mountain. God reached out and pulled him in. Yeah, it's a wonderful image. Okay, we're gonna do hold on. I want to do number 16 and then I will call on people. Jesse, you're okay, number 16. The olive is called olive ze'era, the small olive. Why the small letter? So again, that missing olive was probably, could have been a scrambled error, or the word was Vayikar instead of Vayikra, like it happened instead of Moshe was called. So it's hard to know what's going on, but again, all kinds of meaning was made out of this. This is a very famous example of the explanation of what is this small aleph doing in the scroll. Tomas, do you feel?
Sure.
Okay, loud.
Right here.
Yes, number 60, yes.
In order to begin the process of creating the divine Aleph, the Alufo Shel Olam contracts itself within itself to open a space where finite and seemingly independent realms can coexist. It's about the divine making room for something other than itself. This model stands in contrast to Melo Kol Haaretz Kavodo.
The whole earth is filled with God's presence, or God's
Right.
glory, or God's kavod, right? Yeah.
Radical immanence.
Yes.
In Lurianic cosmology and Kabbalah, a first step of creation is called Tzimtzum. There is a contracting or concealing of God's self, a drawing inward, creating a no-thingness, and a separation so that there is room for another process to unfold. In another sense, Tzimtzum can be seen as a relationship pattern. Moses and each of us struggle to have our own place in the cosmos, and that requires a contraction, creating the small aleph. Tzimtzum is an act of sacrifice, or you could say hospitality, creating an opportunity for independent self-determination.
Beautiful. So according to this understanding, at the end of Exodus, God was expanded. And in order for Moshe to be able to respond to the God's call, God had to contract, right? And that's signified by small. Okay, let me take a few comments. Yeah, thank you so much. So let me just say one more thing about contraction. It's also, a beautiful example of that is sort of pregnancy, right? The mother's body has to sort of contract a little bit to make room for the expanding fetus, right? Oh, okay, yeah, Jesse, and then I see AD has raised her hand as well.
Yes, thank you so much. So many.
And let me make room now for people who haven't spoken yet.
So many beautiful insights that you're bringing us. What it made me think, it's interesting that they just brought up Arizal. That's what I was thinking about, was that the whole story of pre-creation, right, was that Arizal,
Arizal, yeah.
Arizal.
The Sato, the 19th century Italian Torah commentator.
Suggested, right, was that it was too much, right, that God brought light in and it was too much. All the vessels broke, and our whole job is to lift up these sparks. And so, to that extent, like the light of God is right away, it's too much for us. So it seems like this whole story could be read as, with that understanding, the fire is too much, the cloud maybe helps us. He's protecting us, he's protecting Moses, he's protecting us, right? And that shield is actually, and even maybe our own darkness and our own challenges are God's gift to us to not be overwhelmed by that light. And it made me think, there are all these.
Like a good parent who doesn't overwhelm their children.
Yeah. So because there are all these Hasidic stories with the Hasids who are so, connected to God, yet so ecstatic they can't function. Like there are all those stories of they have to hold the person down, they can't move, they're not showing up. And God on this level is saying, your darkness is how you're going to connect to me. You don't want to connect that much because you can't function that way. Right? But connect to me through your darkness. Don't forget when you have challenges, we're really connected. So just keep reaching for me, right? But I'm not going to overwhelm you.
Beautiful, because you can't live in ecstasy all the time. And note also that Vayikra El Moshe, right? Adonai's name is not there. God's name is not there. Moshe was called, right? God, it's really interesting. So it makes sense that the small aleph is interpreted in this way, that God is contracting God's side, right? Just, he was called by what? Where? Who? What? Okay. Tomas, and then I'm going to the screen.
Just building on what you're saying, there's this, I know there's a tradition that the creation of the Mishkan is a recapitulation of the creation of heaven, right?
Yeah.
It's sort of a reenacting of Genesis.
Yeah.
And the mysterious second event of creation is the division of light from darkness, which is really puzzling because it implies that darkness was an aspect of light before they were divided. Because let there be light, okay, and then somehow the darkness
But that was a different darkness.
divided from the light.
Shadow.
And going back to the earlier idea of radiation, how is darkness divided? Radiation is merely transmission, right? It has this spooky connotation in the shadow of the mushroom cloud. But radiance, right? The radiance, it just means emanate, transmission, emission, like the journey of the photons from the screens to our eyes.
Yeah.
It's simply transmission. So before that division, the only way that light can be divided from darkness is distance, because radiance decays over distance. Every type of radiance diminishes with distance. So you could say that the construction of the Mishkan, here and a there, a clear division, is actually a construction of intimacy. Because
absolutely.
the disturbing thing about a cloud
But safe intimacy.
well, a cloud has no edge, right? A cloud, you don't know quite if you're in it or out it. You do know eventually when you're in. But the boundary is radically indeterminate, and maybe that's part of the terror. And so as soon as you make a here and a there, holy ground and a non-holy ground, then the intimacy is possible. The threshold is there, you can go, because you've eliminated the distance, which was the previously only way of dividing light
You know,
from
if you think
dark.
about a cloud and a fire, they're on two now,
Yes, exactly.
right? They're both like dynamic in a certain way.
It's the absence
Right,
of
they're
the boundary.
between matter and spirit.
Right, and ironically, you think, okay, no boundary, I can be
Yeah.
there anyway. But the boundary is required for the intimacy.
That's very cool.
Beautiful. So, okay, two more comments. I need to end a couple of minutes early. So 80 and Mark have been waiting, so please, quick if you can.
Good
Okay,
Shabbos.
80.
Good Shabbos, everyone. In terms of Vayikra, what stands out for me is that it contains the word yakar, which intimates intimacy because it means precious and dear. So the
Yeah, if you look at Ross, we missed, it's that sense is in there. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you.
Oh, that's it? Okay, that's beautiful. And just to expand on what you were saying, Edie, is that Rashi says that Moshe was called, out of love, out of affection, right? And that's why that yakar, that preciousness is there. Okay, Mark, last comment.
It's kind of a question and a bit of confusion. I'm going to go to the Tree of Life and the Sephirah of Hod, which is often referred to as glory or splendor. But the quality of the Sephirah is humility. Which is part of the title of your source sheet. And I'm trying to sort of square the circle here of both the presence of the glory and the ability to sort of create a space to sort of be humble enough for there to be an other. So I'm struggling with that in a bad way. It's just that and the whole sort of tzimtzum nature of creation and how one can have sort of tzimtzum and glory in the same sphira, as it were. This is just something that I'm thinking about, and I don't know whether it makes sense to anybody here, but it's on my mind.
Well, that's such a great question, because when God sort of contracts, right, is the glory diminished? And maybe the glory has to be diminished because otherwise it's too scary or too dangerous to go close. So how, back to the question of, Moshe can tolerate more glory than the people, or more presence, and how much presence can we tolerate? So that's my sense. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's what comes to me at this moment, Mark.
And that's a great,
All
it's a
right.
question and response. Thank you.
You're welcome. Wow, so it's hard to sum this up, but we kind of did a deep dive into the concept of weightiness and glory and how much of that Bnei Israel, the Israelites, could tolerate, how much more Moshe could tolerate as like a prophet who was like a clearer vessel, how much we can tolerate, how much the elders can tolerate, and that sense of, you know, how much do we need to contract also to make room for one another? Right?
Our own sins.
1 second.
No, I'm sorry, I gotta go